I get asked all the time if gamification can really be made accessible, and I understand the concern. Speed tests, flashing graphics, complex interfaces, cognitive overload sounds like a nightmare for inclusive design, right? But after making gamified training for 11 years now and helping hundreds do the same, I've found that if you're doing it right, gamification actually makes training more accessible, not less. And by the end of this video, you'll know 3 ways you can use gamification to support accessibility so that your training can work better for all learners, no matter what their specific needs are. And if you're struggling to create training that's engaging, inclusive, and effective, you can book a free call at the link below so we can talk through your specific challenges and create a game plan for you to build training that works for everyone. Now let's talk accessibility. Here's the reason why gamification and accessibility are completely independent. Let's say you're training IT support staff who use a help desk system to prioritize customer support tickets. In the real world, some staff might use screen readers or high contrast displays, and some might use keyboard navigation instead of a mouse. All of these are accommodations at the interface level. They help the person perceive what the software is telling them and communicate what they want to the software. But the actual skill and the learning, how to diagnose problems, which questions to ask the customer, and when to escalate to a specialist, that problem solving, that know-how, that's happening in their brain. So let's say you give them the task of ordering different support tickets by priority. The first thing people often think of is a drag and drop activity, but that's interface. The skill of prioritizing different support tickets is happening in the learner's brain. So you could meet the same learning objective with a different interface. For example, having the learner click on the tickets in the right order. That's what it means to say that the learning is independent of the interface. Good gamification is about helping build that know-how in the brain through practice activities that build mastery. At its simplest, it can be a simulation that helps the learner practice safely until they reach the level of mastery they need in the real world. And that process of presenting challenges that mirror the real world has nothing to do with the interface, because if the real world activity is accessible to the learner, either natively or through some accommodation like a screen reader, then there's no reason why you can't include that same accommodation in your simulation. So when people have concerns that gamification will hurt accessibility, that's often because they're thinking of gamification as that surface level. Timers, competition, leaderboards, reflex controls, flashy animations, all that stuff that looks and feels gamey resides in the interface level. And to be fair, a lot of empty gamification out there is just that surface stuff, so if that's all you've seen, I understand the concern. But none of that is actually necessary for gamification to be effective. In order to teach the way games teach, all you need is to get the learner to solve increasingly difficult challenges that are relevant to the real world and keep them actively figuring things out for themselves instead of lecturing at them. Good gamification is not about taking that accessible real-world activity and adding friction or extra load to it. And that's why gamification doesn't have to affect accessibility. But now let's talk about how it can actually improve it. There are 3 principles of gamification that really increase accessibility. Number 1, adaptive practice. Do you ever notice how the same game can engage a hardcore gamer but also a total newbie? Well, that's because one of the core principles of teaching the way a game does is dynamic difficulty adjustment, which is just a fancy way of saying that every learner will get exactly the right level of difficulty for where they are in their journey and the right amount of practice that they need. How? Well, games have a ton of tactics they use to give you extra help only when you need it. This is inherently more accessible because it doesn't treat every learner the same. It meets each of us where we are. And games don't do this for accessibility purposes. They do this because we all want the shortest possible path to mastery. If someone is acing the task right in level 1, I don't want to bore him by putting him through all the cycles of practice that I've prepared for the average person. Number 2, player autonomy. Truly effective gamification is built around giving learners meaningful choices in how they progress through the training. Instead of forcing everyone through the exact same sequence, the content is structured in a way to give participants as much choice as possible in their own path based on what works best for them. One example from games is the use of sandboxes. So maybe once I've gone through these basic concepts, I still have to practice all of these scenarios, but now I get to decide which one to tackle first. Again, in gamification, we don't do this for the sake of accessibility, but just to help maintain motivation throughout the course. So if someone's getting tired of one type of activity, they can switch to a different type and keep making progress. That helps keep things fresh. Another thing games excel at is breaking long-term goals into shorter ones. So even if the learner doesn't have a lot of time, they can get in, make a little progress, and get out. That means that if you need to pause for whatever reason, you're free to do so because games are built that way. Everyone reaches the same destination, but they get to choose the route that works for their energy level and their specific needs. And 3, interface flexibility. So another principle of gamification is to give learners flexibility in how they interact with the content. If someone learns better through visual challenges versus text-based ones, they can lean into their strengths while still hitting the same objectives. Principles like immediate feedback, optional help, and increased error tolerance, those are not considered accessibility add-ons here. They're fundamental principles of good gamified design that benefit everyone. And if on top of that you want larger text or you prefer audio over visual cues, then there's no reason why that can't be put into your gamified experience. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, what about cognitive accessibility? Learning differences like ADHD, dyslexia, or memory impairments? Well, this is where the distinction between good and bad gamification becomes even more crucial. Bad gamification can indeed create cognitive barriers, unclear instructions, added stress, information overload, and competing attention demands. This is what people put into their training when they don't know how to make it engaging, so they gamify it by, I don't know, slapping a timer on it. But if that timer is not relevant to the real-world context, there's no reason to add it on just to call the thing gamified. Well-built gamification follows the exact same principles as physical accommodations. If a real-world task creates cognitive overload, then either that task is not accessible to everyone or there's some accommodation that makes it work for everyone. Again, whatever accommodation exists in the real world, you can and should build into your gamified simulation. So if in the real world you're breaking complex information into chunks or providing memory aids or allowing extra processing time, then that's exactly what you simulate in the training. As always, you're giving learners exactly the help they need and no more, so that you're always keeping them at the right level of challenge for them. That's fundamental to engagement no matter who they are. So what does this actually mean for your design process? Well, there's two tips I want to give you. Number one, start with the real world skill you're teaching. Ask yourself, is this task even accessible in the real world? And if so, how? And whatever accommodations or interface exists there, you can bring into your gamified training. And number two, make sure you focus on the cognitive mechanics, the thinking, the problem solving, the decision making that the job actually requires. The specific interface is either irrelevant to that or it can be adapted to match what the learners use in the real world. Point is, there's never any reason for gamification to introduce something different from the real-world task. At its core, it can simply be a directed simulation that builds complexity gradually until the learner meets the learning objective. I understand the concern about gamification and accessibility. It comes from seeing too many programs that threw in game elements without thinking about their purpose. But when you use those elements with intention, and especially with the real-world context in mind, that's when you see that it's not a threat to accessibility, it's an opportunity to make training that works better for everyone. So the next time someone asks you if your gamified training can be accessible, you can confidently say, not only can it be accessible, if it's done right, it's designed to be more accessible than traditional e-learning. And if you want to learn how to apply these principles in your own training, check out my program, the Effective Gamification Framework, where I walk you step by step through creating gamified learning experiences that are both engaging and effective and never gimmicky. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.